Hello again, folks. Welcome back to the Two Stewards Show. We're continuing our series on money, and I'm here with the lovely and talented Brent.
Thanks, Mark.
And my name is Mark.
I mean, I know I'm talented, but I didn't know I was lovely.
Well, somebody needs to tell you every now and again, don't they, Brent?
Oh, man.
Okay, we were talking about money last time.
Talking about how to store your value in the future.
Stopped halfway through.
Store the value of your time.
Exactly. And to understand like what makes good money, what makes sound money, we want to talk about some of the characteristics of money. We were getting through that, and we were getting a bit long, so we stopped there. But why don't we get back to that, right? We talked about some of the characteristics of money as being it should be divisible.
Yeah.
It should be durable.
Yeah.
It should be portable. Right, all these things. So we have a few more things that we can talk about. So one is that it should be so fungible, which is kind of the same, I think, as uniform. So if you think of NFTs, do you know NFTs, Brent?
Yeah.
Non-fungible tokens?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of when that word became
Don't ask
popular.
me to describe what they do.
Well, they're basically unique, right? That's sort of the opposite, I think, of fungible.
Right.
And yeah, they're ridiculous, but the idea is you would have this unique piece of digital art that could not be duplicated.
It's a digital token that is non-fungible.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when it comes to money, we want it to be fungible or duplicatable. But yeah, so to be the exact same. So uniform is another way I think of describing it, right? When you have a $20 bill, all the other $20 bills are the same.
And in the context of money, it's not just that they're the same. It's not like a piece of art where like you can just take a digital version of artwork and copy paste it, and now you have two of the same.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like money is a store of value, so it's that token or that money has the same amount of value. Like it stores the same amount of value in it. So if I give you a $20 bill and we both have a $20 bill and we change them, it's not like yours has 0.001% more value in it. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe if you're famous and you sign it, then now all of a sudden it's worth $20 million. But yeah, in general, you want your currency or your money to, they're not the same. I shouldn't say that.
They're not. Your money.
Yeah, you want your money to be fungible.
And so that's useful for trade, right? Because then I know that if we have,
but you jumped right to the answer.
Well, I read your mind, Brent.
Why?
I could see right through you. No, but so if we go back to this example of villages,
not only am I lovely and talented, but I'm also see-through.
Yeah, this idea of people transacting trade through, within different villages or different countries.
Yeah.
Right. So if you imagine that they eventually settled on gold as an example, what's happened is gold coins came into existence. So generally, this would be the ruler of that city or the country.
Yeah, he was probably getting sick and tired of everybody sitting around all day weighing gold. He's just, you know what? We got to make a coin.
Yeah, well, and that's how a lot of them came into being, right? So you would often have them, if we go to the, my favorite, the Roman Empire. Yeah. You would have the likeness of the emperor imprinted upon the coins so that everybody would know this is a Roman coin. It's bearing the likeness of the emperor, so he approves of this. And they are all the same because they were produced in this, by the Roman mint, whatever that would be, and then disseminated throughout the empire. But they're all the same. They all have the same value, and you can trust it because the emperor backs it. Yeah. And, of course, people fooled around with it, and they would shave coins and do all kinds of stuff.
But now you can imagine, like, the transaction, how that goes, right? Give me that product that you have on the shelf there. It's 5 gold coins. Okay, let's pull them out of your wallet. Blink, blink, blink. Thank you. Right, just one quick glance at the money that you handed the person or the merchant. Now all of a sudden the transaction's over. Right, it's not like he takes it and he weighs it out and says, okay, well, no, actually you owe me a little bit more. And no. Now your transaction speed can increase dramatically. Right. And which is great because when you talk about the value of trade, right, being the production of What do you even say? I don't even remember. A lot of the things you say, I tune you out. So.
You and my wife both. Wow. Well, no, that is, so we're talking about uniformity of money, right? So if you know that it's uniform, you can trust it instead of like, this guy's got these coins from here and there, and I don't know what these coins are.
Yeah, no, but you always talk about how trade is the beginning of value or something like that.
Foundation of wealth.
Foundation of wealth. Yeah.
Yes.
See, I was listening when you said it this time.
Halfway, anyways.
Yeah. So if trade is slow, then you can see that, you know, wealth creation or wealth is going to be slow. And then, yeah, if you can speed that up, well, fungibility or uniformity in your money is one really easy way to scale it up.
Yeah.
Speed it up.
Yeah. I mean, there's another concept there too, right? The velocity of money, which we talk about more in conjunction with our current money system. But if you want to slow inflation down, you kind of slow down the speed of money, the velocity of money. And that's how quickly it will circulate through the economy, right? But that's a bit of a side note. Maybe we'll talk about that next time. But so in order for money to be good and useful, it should be uniform. It should be fungible, so that you can have trust that each unit is the same. Yeah. And there's speed in trade. Recognizable, and that kind of ties into this as well, right? If we know that, okay, this coin bears the image of Caesar, I've seen this before, we use it all over the empire.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not like, what is this now?
Yeah.
Well, it's like you can imagine if you had $20 bills and like they're all different colors, for example.
Yeah.
Right. And just the guy who designed them thought, you know what, let's make them all different colors. You know, no two the same. Well, they all say 20 on it. It's all actually supposed to represent 20, but they're not very easily recognizable. So you're going to pull it out of your wallet and the guy's going to be like, wait a minute. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like kind of like going back to coming out of the sort of the medieval period, out of the Dark Ages, as they call them, right? You had Venice started minting their own money, ducats, I think, and then Florence started minting their own coins, florins. Yeah. And, you know, very quickly they became recognized all throughout the world, at least along the trade routes anyways, as valid money. And if you had a florin, like that was worth something because it was backed by Florence. And, it actually had value because because of the amount of gold that was in it. But that, again, that's an example of something that was recognizable. People would, so you might have someone who had like a bag of coins and there were some florins in there, some ducats in there, some dinars, from like the Turkish Empire. But they were all recognizable and traders knew what they were and they had trust in them. Yeah. And that enabled trade to continue.
Ooh, and now we get to the most important one or the most exciting one.
Etc. Oh, no. Sorry. I'm sorry. No. Down on the list there. Etc. is not an important value of money.
No. But unless you're in fiat money like today.
Yeah, then it's etc. No, scarcity. It has to be scarce.
Why does it have to be scarce?
Because if it's not scarce, then it really doesn't have a lot of value, right? Yeah. So if you think of, I don't know, what's an example? Well, so gold is an example, I guess, of something that is relatively scarce. Yeah. It's not absolutely scarce, but it's relatively scarce. Yeah. And which is, again, why people historically have gravitated towards gold, right?
Yeah, whether or not it's actually scarce or if our ability as human beings to extract it from the earth is limited.
And that's more the point. Yeah. Right. As technology improves, we can access different commodities.
Why is it's important? Because money, like we talked about earlier in last episode, we keep saying is a store of your time. Yeah. Right. It's a store of the value of your time. So if you're trying to store your labor into the future and you're looking for a medium to do that in, you obviously want something that can't be easily produced. Yeah. Right? Because if somebody can just easily produce it, right, in effect what they're doing is just devaluing your time. And they're if you work really hard and you store your value in this thing, and then somebody else can work not very hard and produce lots of these things. Now it's not very scarce. And so that's one of the reasons why I kind of say it's the most important one, because that really underlies the whole system. Is it has to really, it has to be durable, it has to outlast, but that's kind of like this physical aspect to it, right? Like you don't want to deteriorate, but more importantly, you don't want somebody else to go out there and produce millions and millions of these things and devalue, in a very quick way, the value of your time. So for example, like if you chose gold, that's great. It might not rot or corrode for years and years, but if somebody can go out and mine, all the gold and come on your doorstep and be like, look, your time is worth nothing now.
Well, so interesting. There's an example in history, and historians disagree on the accuracy of this, but you had Mansa Musa. He was a famous African king, and had
was he famous
from Mali, I think.
Infamous?
I think he was famous.
Famous, okay.
Maybe a little infamous. Oh man, I should know this. I think he was from the kingdom Mali.
Okay.
And they had tons of, like Africa, lots of natural resources. They had tons of gold. So he made a trip up into, where did he go? Up into sort of Asia Minor, Europe, that area. And apparently if you believe the stories, he brought so much gold with him that he actually depressed the economies of all the places that he visited, because they spent very liberally and used so much gold.
That it debased all the gold
It debased all the currency, right? It reduced the scarcity of like everybody had gold, like beggars got gold, right?
Yeah.
So for years to come, it affected those economies. So, again, historians are divided on how truthful this is.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a grain of truth to it at the very least, but this is a country that had a lot of gold, and even gold was able to be debased. But I think an important aspect of scarcity is also the knowledge that it's scarce.
Right.
Because not only is it is something
be
scarce, people have to know that it is scarce as well, to have that trust that it's not going to be easily added
so you
to.
kind of say they would have to verify that it's scarce?
No, but I mean, everybody kind of knows, right, that, gold is scarce. And I mean, now we have much more information, but even
more technology to go find it.
So. 1,000 years ago, people also understood that. Like, it takes a lot of labor to get it, and it's not very often that you have a gold mine, and if you have one, that's really valuable because there's not many out there.
Yeah.
But we can, if you think there's some examples, right? So, is it Seyfuddin Ammous who talks about this? Like the Yap Islands.
Yeah.
Right, with these ray stones.
Yeah.
Where
rye stones.
Rye.
Yeah. Whatever.
Rye.
The Yappies.
Potato.
The island of Yap, for those who might want to Google it. So YAP.
Yes.
Yup.
Which is what we do a lot. There's a lot of yapping. Anyways, they use these stones, which were not native to this island. They had to go far away to quarry them, right? And the bigger the stone, the more valuable it was, and it was kind of currency. So you would have, like, basically the chiefs would have the biggest stones, and it was just known who owned this stone or that stone, right? Depending on the size. You could have some smaller ones, I guess, for local trade or whatever, but you would have like a really big one, like maybe it's a ton, and it just, they mine it, quarry it, get it to this spot, and they dump it there, and then it wouldn't move. Ownership of that stone would change, and it'd be like, Chief A would own it, and then he would trade it to Chief B for something, and people all understood that this is what it was. And so this worked for a long time for them, right? Because they're relatively isolated, and this thing was scarce.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of effort to go get more of these stones, till this European fella came along and thought, hey, I can just go mine a whole bunch of these because I got a big boat. I can put a lot of these stones in there.
Yeah.
I have technology, so it's much easier for me to quarry these stones. So he did that, and long story short, crashed their economy, right? And made these stones effectively useless.
So you want the money to be hard to produce or expensive to produce, essentially.
Yeah.
Which, in the context of rye stones on the island of Yap,
Or ray stones.
Ray stones. Those stones, the big stones with the hole in the middle, donut stones. In the context of that, they were very hard and time consuming to produce in their little village.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, if
but
you
the minute
think
you
of-
introduce other technologies that they could never have thought of,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, maybe those people in that village would not have chosen that to be money, right? They would have sought something else.
Yeah.
But their context wasn't changed until this guy showed up in a boat with the technology to like dynamite or whatever he needed to blow up all the stones,
Yeah.
right? And quarry them. So
So yeah, another example would be glass beads, agri beads, or they're mentioned by different names, but
Yeah.
in a large portion of Saharan Africa or West Africa, anyways.
yeah,
West? That was east. I think it was west. A large portion of Africa, shall we say, where they use these glass beads for trade for many, many years
yeah,
because they were hard to find, hard to polish and form, and like they're relatively rare. They're
Yeah.
pretty scarce,
yeah,
right? Not so scarce that like if you saw one, it was a big
Yeah.
deal, but you could have these beads, you could put them on necklaces. So they met a lot of the other characteristics that we talk about, right? They're pretty durable.
Yeah.
They were not necessarily uniform
yeah.
because they would all be different, but they were recognizable, right? And they were relatively scarce to the
Yeah.
point where many tribes use them.
And fairly
for
portable
trade.
as well. Like you could put them in a necklace
Yes.
or a bracelet, and yeah, it almost became like a show of status or wealth, right? You wear these things, and
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, you could trade them for stuff. And
so
eventually,
scarcity.
scarcity was the biggest factor, right?
Yeah, but then what happened? Dun, dun, dun.
Da, da, da. Well, eventually Europeans...
We have the advantage of hindsight with history books, but
Yeah, exactly.
people are going to do this to us in 200 years, and like, you remember I was listening to the Two Stewards show the other day, and like they thought money was this, and ha ha ha, like, then what
Well,
happened?
so there are some parallels to today. We can argue that what happened with those is what's happening today as well.
Yeah, okay, but let's talk about what happened with those.
Okay, let's talk about that first.
So the Africans are using these beads. They're relatively scarce. They're valuable in other ways, and now like their economy is kind of functioning off them quite well. What happens?
Yeah, and this wasn't the only thing that they used, but it was an important thing. So, once Europeans sort of rediscovered Africa or started, right? Arabs had been trading there for years, but Europeans came in and they had glass making technology. So Venice specifically, they're like, hey, and like even if you go to Italy now, right? You have Murano glass.
Okay.
Which is still ridiculously expensive. I don't know why, but just glass blowing is a thing there, right?
Yeah.
They'll to this day they make lots of fine things out of glass, and then incorporate different colors and stuff, right? But they
Yeah.
realize like, hey, these guys use these beads.
And all
We
they
can
are,
make these beads,
yeah,
right? They're not exactly the same. They're not maybe formed by volcanoes or whatever, but we can make them.
yeah,
And so, like, I could just imagine the first guy who like got a whole
clued
bunch of
into
them,
it.
who went over there, and he was just like, hey, I got some beads. You want to trade for something? And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, great. He's
Yeah.
like, it actually worked. It actually worked.
yeah.
Right?
Let me go back to the ship with a wheelbarrow.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. They would come over with ships like full of beads.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't show them or tell the people they're trading, but they would go from like one tribe to the next tribe to the next tribe.
And basically just plunder these tribes.
Yeah, and they didn't
and I guess in a
realize.
peaceful way, right? Like you're plundering through diluting their money supply.
Yeah.
The glass beads are no longer scarce, so all these African people who are storing the value of their time in these beads,
Yeah.
right? Maybe for generations, who knows, right? All of a sudden, some guy shows up in a boat and he's like, "Thank you, I'll take your intergenerational wealth, and I'm gonna use it for this instead."
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And yeah, so it's important to note that like this happened over probably hundreds of years,
Yeah.
where to the point where like the beads were no longer useful, because people eventually but they, the people that lived there didn't realize this right away. It was happening right under their nose.
Yeah.
They couldn't see it. The Europeans could see it.
Yeah.
Other people could probably see it, but nobody told them. and they didn't realize like until it was too late.
Yeah.
So another interesting side note, if you will, is that this was used to facilitate the slave trade.
Yeah.
Right? The slave trade existed before the Europeans came, but once they came, they're like, hey, I can get a lot of slaves for my colonies in the Caribbean and in the Americas with these glass beads. No longer do I have to do a whole bunch of trade for like spices or whatever,
Yeah.
go to China, trade this for spices, and then, do a whole bunch of trades and then come back here with the spices that these guys
Isn't
want.
another name for these beads slave beads or something?
Yeah, so yeah, that'd be another one, right?
Yeah.
And they did a booming business. And so essentially you can just see how large portions of Africa were, like you said, plundered, right?
Yeah.
For their, like the most important resource, if you could term it that way, which is people.
Yeah.
And shipped them out to be slaves in other areas.
Just to underscore, like the slave trade existed before this. It's kind of always existed throughout history, but by having unsound money or money that is not scarce, the people who can create the money can take advantage over the people who can't create the money and are living in this kind of, I don't know where he got all these beads from, but I guess they're real. And well, here's my,
this is what we use. We've always used it for a long time. This is how it is.
Yeah.
Right? Why would I, like my parents used it, my grandparents used it.
Yeah. Why does it all of a sudden not work now? Like I've never seen glass making technology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's trade. Okay. And then, eventually they get more and more and more of your wealth. But it's funny that you talk about slaves because essentially what money, like I keep bringing back to this, but money is the value of your time, right? So if you're actually, you're quite literally a slave when somebody controls the money, right?
Yeah.
Because if somebody comes in and they control the money, they can essentially buy all of your time, right? Or take the value of all of your time. And that is slavery.
Yeah.
Because like now you don't control your time and you're working for someone else. And that's kind of like, I guess, more of a physical rudimentary way. But today we kind of have the same sort of thing, right? Like if one entity controls the supply of the money and can dilute it or massively increase the supply, by doing so, they essentially steal your time, right? And you can't efficiently store the value of your time. So you're essentially just giving up a percentage of your time to the person who is producing that money. So I don't know if that's a good way to explain it, but it's an interesting connection when you talk about slavery and the value of your time.
Yeah, certainly not minimizing, the effects of the slave trade and what happened there, especially with,
I'm not saying
capital.
It's a good thing.
No, but it is, it makes you think. It's an interesting parallel. And it is interesting that, like, so we don't really have the slave trade now. But again, if you look at Africa and the policies of, I'm not like anti, everything is, all our problems come because of colonialism and the patriarchy. And like, I am not that way at all, but there are some things that you can't deny. And when you look at Africa, it's still is sort of being plundered for natural resources. There are people working in essentially like slave conditions for all the resources that Africa has to offer. And this is happening through, you can talk about the colonial powers did that through the years, right? Everybody had their turn. But there's still vestiges of colonialism in Africa, right? France still controls the money supply in a number of countries, which just kind of blew my mind. Like, they have a special kind of franc that they can only use, and it's tied to natural resource extraction. And France really relies on, like, it's not something a lot of people talk about, but I don't know. I'd love to do an episode on that sometime. But then you've also got, like China is blatantly doing it with their Belt and Road Initiative, where they are supplying money, supplying debt to these countries in exchange for infrastructure spending. But now they've got that, they understand once you get somebody in debt, now they're your slave.
Yeah.
Right. And, Americans will decry China for doing this, but America's been doing the same thing for years through whether through outright lending and infrastructure programs, whether it's through the IMF
it's
or
almost
whether it's
like
through
a
foreign
more
reserves.
Yeah, it's almost like a more peaceful way to steal people's value, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a civilization where everyone stores their wealth in, let's say, these glass beads, and you want to actually take all of their wealth.
Yep.
You can go in and fight them and actually take their glass beads, but a more peaceful and perhaps more effective tactic over the long term to extract value, especially if you have certain things that you want, but you don't necessarily want to obliterate the society. You just want them to keep producing the thing that you want. You want to buy it undervalued, or you want to basically take it, using these kind of superior monetary technologies and coming in, or superior means of production of their monetary technology. And you come in and you just totally take the value that they've worked so hard for, and you take it for yourself, right? It's a more peaceful way of theft.
it's more insidious, right? Because you can also, going back to
you don't even notice.
We're talking about, you can also go in then and build infrastructure as an example, and be like, look, we'll build this airport, but then you owe us.
Yeah.
So not only are you extracting the current value that they have, their resources, either at some point those resources are depleted, or maybe they're not, and you just continually do it. But then you also have a stranglehold over this country or this nation, and like they can't get away, even if they realize what's going on, they can't get away. Hey, quick side note here.
Okay. When Mark says quick and side note, buckle up.
Go get a piece of pie or something and have a seat. No, so this YouTuber, Mr. Beast, I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
Okay, so he's a YouTuber, probably
might have had it.
The most famous YouTuber, probably.
Okay. That's probably what I haven't heard.
So he went over to a couple countries in Africa, like Kenya and a few other places, and he's like, you know what, we're just going to go build 100 wells.
Right.
And they went and they built 100 wells, which are like essential for communities, right? To have clean, safe drinking water, and did it like, I can't remember, but like really quickly, pretty cheaply.
Yeah.
But he spent his own money, right? And like a lot of this will come back to him in YouTube views and monetize it. But it was philanthropy, and like he got a little bit of flack for doing this, right? Especially from some of the non-governmental organizations who are there to, from governments, for one, and the Kenyan government wasn't all too happy with them because it kind of showed them up. These NGOs weren't too happy because it kind of showed them up. And I was just thinking about this, talking about Africa plundering the resources, and like, what is the point? A lot of these non-governmental organizations, right? Their stated goal is, we're going to bring clean drinking water to Africans, and like, or food, or like whatever their goal is, they never achieve it.
Right.
And maybe you're conspiracy minded, maybe you're not. Take this for what you think, right? But they're much better. If I'm working for a non-government organization, there's no job security if I actually set out if I accomplish what we set out to do. I'm like, we're going to build X amount of wells, and I do that, well, now I'm out of a job. If I can just keep it on the cusp and keep getting donations and never actually fully achieve what we want to do. And it's just an example of like, he went in there, he's like, I'm going to build 100, and it was easy.
Yeah.
The technology exists, the people exist, they just need some money to build the wells.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, what about, keeping them running and all that? It's like, well,
we'll build another one next week.
well, that, or like, I'll continue to fund it, or maybe the government can take over. Like, surely you can just provide people for maintenance for these things, right?
Yeah.
But it's just an example of, I don't know. I guess we're talking about people taking resources from poor countries. And there's just so much grift that happens around all of this. And a lot of it is centered around money. And as we'll probably get into another time, like, it's the result of unsound money.
Yeah.
If you had sound money, if you had a perfect money.
Another way to look at it too is that, like, the fact whether or not the money itself can be controlled, right?
Yeah.
Because choosing agri beads or glass beads in that society, in the African society, like the supply of those beads couldn't be controlled until the Europeans introduced that element, right? And then they could manufacture it.
Yeah, if you were really industrious and you had the time, you could probably go like dig them up or find them or polish them or whatever, right? But there was a significant amount of time and risk associated with that.
So that gets into the concept I think we want to talk about next, which is we'll maybe hone in on gold essentially, but why was gold chosen? Well, it's hard or costly to produce, right?
Yeah.
So the other element of scarcity is the fact that like it's actually expensive to produce, so therefore it's scarce. But something we should talk about is the stock to flow ratio.
Whoa,
and that's a huge concept, but it very directly ties into all this. So stock to flow ratio. Stock is how much is in stock. How much money do we have?
What do we got on the shelf?
In there, like out there, right?
Yeah.
And the flow is how much new money can be created in any given year, right?
Yeah.
And that ratio of the existing stockpiles of this money versus the newly produced or newly minted money or newly mined, whatever it is, that ratio is very important to look at when you're examining and you've got your little clipboard or check boxes and you're going down the list. Like, is this going to be a good money, right? So you want something, is it a high stock to flow ratio or a low stock to flow ratio? I always forget.
Well, it would be stock to flow. You want a high stock to the available flow.
And why? So you want a high stock because you want the inflation of the new supply to be low. You want it to be
one side,
minimal.
the other's low. Yeah.
Because what essentially, it's hard to find something that has a zero, like where there's as 100%, 0%. It's hard to find something where there is no more being produced, right? Because like any commodity out there, like you can always go into the Earth's surface and mine more copper or zinc or gold or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you can find these elements and you can create them, and they have varying degrees of cost to produce, right? Or cost to mine, cost to purify. So the ones that have a huge stockpile are ones that the substance that you're mining or producing doesn't rot or deteriorate, right? So it's always existed. It's like, and so gold kind of fits that, right? It doesn't corrode or rot or deteriorate over time. So the stockpiles aren't going away, right? Essentially. The other way to look at stockpiles is whether or not they're being consumed, right?
Yeah.
So like grain or cattle or salt or some of these other things that were chosen as money in past civilizations, those things can be consumed. So you might have a large stockpile one year, but then, you consume half of it.
And the stock to flow is unpredictable. You could have a good grain harvest or a bad grain harvest. So it's not so bad if there's a lower stock to flow, like if you got more flow because you got to constantly replace, but it's not very predictable either, right?
Yeah. So, and if you're storing your value, the value of your time in something, you obviously want to have ideally a stable stock to flow ratio and one that's predictable, like you said.
I thought you said not cows. You're talking about stables.
You don't want your stock to flow ratio to be in the stable.
Oh, okay.
You want it to be the stable.
Okay, perfect.
So, and then the flow side of it is what's being produced every year, right? And so that is kind of directly linked to the cost to produce again. Because if you think about it, if gold is money, why doesn't everybody just go out and mine gold, right? Like it's money. Just go get it out of the ground, people, and then you have money. Like, why would you go to work and work all day for maybe a tiny fraction of a piece of gold when you could just go out, and mine it?
Oh, that's what they did in the gold rush, in the Klondike.
Yeah. So the reality is that gold is this thing that is quite expensive and time consuming to mine or to produce, right? And it's not under the control of an entity that can just produce it. It's naturally that, right? It's governed by nature and the fact that like you have to actually go outside and dig for this stuff, right?
Or produce it from seawater.
Or seawater. How do they do that? Why don't we start doing
Well,
that,
they
Mark?
can't yet because it's too expensive,
okay.
but there is trace amounts of gold in seawater apparently.
Yeah. So, and that's where like the cost to produce is very it's very important because if it was cheap to produce, everyone would just do it. But if it's expensive to produce, then no one does it. So then you have like your stock to flow ratio kind of plays out over time, right?
Yeah.
And these waves, like you have the gold rush, everybody's doing it. Well, then the price of gold kind of climbs a bit, right? And
Well, drops.
Yeah, sorry. There's more gold, so yeah, the value of it drops. But then when it's maybe a bit more scarce. But what's gold stock to flow ratio over history?
Like 2%.
Yeah, but compare that to other things. Like other things would be 1% or be 5%, 10%.
No, it would be
100%.
higher. Yeah. Gold is a very low, maybe we got it backwards, but low stock to flow. So it's a low flow, right? 2% of new gold is produced each year. Now that's on average, right?
Yeah.
Some years is more, some is a little bit less. But that has proven to be like a good low number.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about it, right? Because all the easy gold was mined, kind of by hand or with little technology. All the stuff that was close to the surface has already been mined, right?
Yeah.
Unless there's some that we haven't found, which is possible. But then as the population of the earth grew and as trade expanded, because you're thinking all the gold that was ever produced is still in existence. So
Yeah.
why isn't it worth less? Well, because there's more trade and there's more people.
Yeah.
So it kind of fits naturally that way.
Yeah.
And then, as it gets harder to mine,
Yeah.
technology also increases
It gets better at mining it.
and gets better at mining it.
Yeah.
So, and it's never is like a perfect line, right? You'll have it'll get really, really hard to mine and there's not much available. And then boom, there's a new technology that makes it easier.
Gold's
again.
interesting because it's been like sought after as money for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
So we've had the advantage of looking at this curve for like a long, long period of history. And then we can kind of predict what the next, X number of years are going to be because we know it's like 2% and just seems to be that way no matter what the technology is, no matter what the incentive to mine it is or whatever. But when you hear the concept or the term hard money, I guess that's one like this ties into that because it's hard to produce, right? So if you ever hear that word, that's kind of what that means, right? Like hard money is something that's hard to produce or expensive to produce. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of. I might disagree a little
All
bit
right,
there.
let's
but
disagree. Let's do it.
Let's disagree to disagree. But yeah, even back like in Genesis, right? It references, it talks about the gold of Havilah.
It does? All right, let's
It
pull
does.
that
I think you mentioned that
up. Yeah.
last time. You mentioned it
No,
at some
I
point.
Yes. Genesis chapter 2. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. Does that sound really good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good.
So, interesting, right?
Yeah.
We never, I don't know. We just kind of take that as a description of like, okay, here's kind of like physically or geographically what it was like. But why would why make that point that the gold was good?
Yeah. Oh,
Right? I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah.
Suffice it to say, it had value.
Yeah.
And it still has value. Now, we've managed to corrupt that, right? I don't know if we want... Yeah, we should probably go there,
We're
right?
pretty good at corrupting things.
Yeah, even something like gold that God has said is good, we still manage to corrupt it, right? So maybe we talk about banks for...
Oh, great.
For a minute. Well, maybe we'll close off the episode with a rant about banks.
Yeah.
Right? So banks have been around forever. A bank essentially is a spot where you could safely put your money.
Well, just quickly, the history of banks, right? So why do you need...
That's what I was talking about. Brent.
Why do you need banks to begin with?
Yeah, so if you had a whole bunch of gold, what would you do, right? You'd dig a hole under your hut, or your house or your castle or whatever. And that was done, right? And that's why, like, you know, you read about the Vikings,
The pirates.
raiding and plundering, right? And they would get these big chests of gold, right? And that could have been like in the castle, you had the keep and you had like a lot of gold there and other precious metals, or in a church and maybe it was buried somewhere, right? People would hide it somewhere. So eventually someone was like, hey, I can, you know, keep it in a bank.
Make a business out of
And the bank will keep it, will keep it safe,
Yeah.
and they'll custody it, so I don't have to wander around with like this massive chest of gold to do business, right? I can get a note from the bank that says, hey, this guy has X amount of gold, and use this note is basically tradable for gold. We, as the bank, will guarantee it.
Yeah.
And that facilitated a lot of international trade as well. You would just have these certificates, and they were exchangeable for gold. And you would have, you know, the traders would have to have an understanding between them that, like, yes, I trust this bank, and he trusts that. And, you know, a lot of them would maybe start it out just as merchants.
This is crazy. Like the actual token that you get from the bank then is not money.
No.
Right?
But there was a high degree of trust among these traders, and a lot of them would be like relatives, right? So you had a family here, and then one guy went over to this other port city, and he would establish a thing there, but they would trust each other because they're family, right? That was the bond. And, you know, if somebody comes with a certificate or like a letter from Uncle Fred, who went to this city, right? You would trust that, and you'd be like, okay, here's some gold. So now I can travel from place to place. I don't need to bring gold with me. I can just go there and get some out of the bank, as long as I'm like, okay, I gave this guy 10 gold coins. Now I'm going to go over to this city, and I'm going to exchange this certificate for 10 gold coins.
But now the transactions take on a bit of a different level of complexity. You're no longer doing like peer-to-peer. You're no longer doing person-to-person transaction with money. You're no longer exchanging that value directly. Indirect exchange. Now you've got like another layer of indirect exchange inside of there, right?
Yeah.
You're trading your value for a certificate, and you're taking that certificate to another institution, and then you're trading that in to get your other money, and then you go do your transaction or whatever.
Yeah, and so you'd, there's a high degree of trust required.
Yeah.
And when you had merchants that all trusted each other, that kind of worked out. Because if anybody ever tried to cheat the system, like, they would be out of business. Nobody would trade with them or do business. So, I mean, fast forward a little bit. If you want to think in the North American context, right, you would have banks set up here. And same thing, they would take in gold, and then they would issue paper certificates based on that. But they realized this is the start of fractional reserve banking, right? That wasn't like a recent this century or last century kind of thing, but goes back a little ways. They realized that, hey, I've got, 100 pounds of gold or whatever from all these different people. Not everybody is actually going to want all their gold at once. So I can lend some of it out without actually lending. I can lend out on credit more than I actually have on deposit.
Yeah.
Right. And if everybody comes back at once, well, then we got a problem. Right. And that was the run on the bank, right? When they had more lent out than they actually had. So then they would try and get back what they had lent out. Right.
So when you compare that to what we're just talking about, the stock to flow ratio and how money can be hard to produce, those bank receipts or those notes that the banks are giving are not very difficult to produce, right? The guy's producing one for one customer who gives him gold, and then all of a sudden he's producing him another one. And he just does it with like total fiat, where there's nobody who actually, exchanged gold for that. He just has the other guy's gold in reserve, and he's fractionally lending on it. Like, the cost to produce that certificate is very low, right? He didn't have to go mine the gold. He didn't have to go and even produce agri beads to make that value appear, right?
Yeah.
So now the banker can benefit from, being able to lend out all of this and make a return on that. So.
Yeah. So, this is known as fractional reserve banking because you're, lending out more than you like fractions, but more than you have. So, I've got this little chart here in this wonderful book, You, Me, and Airbnb, where we talk about money and fractional reserve banking. And this is simplified, but it it does represent what can happen or what has happened, what does happen, right? So I come in with $1,000 to a bank, and that could, $1,000 in gold, or in this case now it's just $1,000 in cash, right? The bank has to keep some of that in reserve. And, these reserve requirements have dropped quite a bit to the point where in Canada anyways, there's not actually a number. It just has to be a reasonable amount. But let's say that was 10%. That was a rule in the States for a long time, which has been dropped as well. But let's say the bank had to keep at least $100 in reserve. And they made these rules based on how many people are going to come and want to take out their money. So that means they have $900 that they can loan out. So now there's actually, I got $1,000 in the bank, quote unquote, but they've lent out $900. So now there's actually $1,900 in the system. The bank only has $100.
Yeah, that's not good.
Right?
I see where this is going.
Right. So now I can, person B can
Mark,
borrow that $900.
Why don't we start a bank?
If only. That is literally a license to print money. Person B goes to the next bank, puts that $900 on deposit. The bank keeps $90 in reserve, and they loan out $810. And so you just do this ad infinitum, right? To the point where there's $100 could be $10,000 worth of deposits. $1,000 could be 10 grand easily of money in the system. And the banks are allowed to do this, right? And initially there were controls put on banks because, banks would lend out more than they had, and then either everybody would come and need their money at once because of some event that happened, or somebody would get wind of it and be like, ooh, I got to get my gold out before everybody else cottons on to what's going on. So I'm going to run there. But then other people figure it out and they all go and they're all like, I want my money. And the bank's like, oh, we don't have it. So this happened a bunch of times, right?
Yeah.
And even goes 1800s, for example, bunch of times till people said, hey, you know what? We need the government to really straighten this out. Central bank. The concept of a central bank was created. This was contentious. Andrew Jackson was one of the presidents who really debated against, and I believe for a while stopped the central bank. So the first central bank in the United States anyways had a 10-year charter, and that expired. And then they argued about it for a while, and then eventually created another one. That one expired. And then 1913, we have the Federal Reserve Bank came into existence. That's the one that we are familiar with it now. But even back then, people saw the danger of central banking, because what they didn't do, they didn't get rid of fractional reserve banking.
Yeah.
They didn't say you can only loan out what you have. They said, you know what, you guys really are doing a bad job, and we're going to centralize this, and we're going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just guys.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, you had an opportunity, and what do you do? So now
But even the word fractional reserve, they admit that there's a reserve, and the reserve is actually money, right? The notes or whatever they're lending on top is just debt for the reserves, and the reserves are the money. So when you talk about historical monies that were used, to me, those are almost the real money, and you're actually taking the money, which is the representative of the store of value, and you physically hold it, and then you physically transact with it for some other thing, and then you get that in return, right?
Yeah.
When you start to abstract this with a banking system where the actual physical part of it is put into the bank, and then the bank gives you a fiat token, or a note, a piece of, maybe it's still a physical piece of paper, but it's just an abstraction, right? It's not actually gold. It's just a note that says there's gold somewhere, and you can go get it if you want. And in today's day and age, you don't even get a physical thing. You just get a notification on your phone. Hey, buddy, you got some representations of something in your bank account. And we don't even have representations of something anymore.
No.
But when you add that layer of abstraction to this, it becomes okay, first of all, more complex for people to understand. But then it's almost like when it's normalized, it's like, okay, well, and then people can take advantage of it without people knowing. And that's where we are today, I think, right? Where like the central institutions that like central bank, the government can control these things without people really knowing, caring, or having any say. And then they can quickly disseminate it through digital means to everybody's bank account or whatever, right?
Well, if you use
crazy.
the glass bead example,
Yeah.
right, again, the people who were in those societies didn't really see what was happening. They just knew, like, hey, I got a whole bunch of glass beads.
Yeah.
Like, I can go buy a whole bunch of stuff for
Turns
whatever,
out everything's
right?
more expensive.
Yeah, oh, okay, it costs a little more in glass beads to buy this same thing that I
Yeah.
bought, last week, but like whatever, I got more of them. So it's all good. They didn't understand what was happening
Yeah.
to their money system. It was being corrupted and eventually would impoverish them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just a note, like central banking, again, not a big fan of central banking, but Lynn Alden also she walks through this in a lot more detail than we have, but she notes the difference between centralized banking and centralized fractional reserve lending or banking,
Yeah.
which is really the issue. Centralized fractional reserve lending.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you have basically the central banks backstop the governments and their reckless spending policies.
Yeah, because if you have an institution that's just literally custodying, custodying the money, right? And so
a little
they're
bit like custard.
custodying the money, and you bring it to them, and you.
Oh, the delicious Central Bank of Canada.
But if you have that institution and they're doing it one for one, right? And they give you a note that says it's fully redeemable, well, as long as you trust them that is one to one, and they are actually doing it one to one,
Yep.
then it could work quite well, right? If it actually is. But it's that trust element that the society, like people in the society, have to trust that institution is doing that one to one.
Well, the only thing I would trust is that when you centralize that much power, and that, like money, power, well, that it's going to be corrupted.
Yeah.
And it has been.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my point's right.
I don't have any counter arguments.
Easy argument to make,
Yeah.
but I think it's true, right? And so that's part of the problem with centralizing all this is we know, right? If you think mankind is basically good and will do the right thing,
Yeah.
okay, then that's a great idea. If you think no, we're corrupt and we're going to find out a way to ruin everything that we can,
Well, for our advantage too, right? You put someone
Yeah.
in that position of power. It's not
Yeah.
like he just wants to destroy the system. It's most of the time they use it like strategically for their advantage.
absolutely.
And then when you see it in central banks, in cahoots with the government, and we'll talk about this in a different episode.
but yeah, it's
very heated conversations about
people
that.
often talk about the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
And how like that was our ruin.
People do, or just you and I?
Well, I mean,
Some
we're people.
Yeah.
No, but other people too.
Yeah.
Talk about how the gold standard, like 1971, if you're not familiar with this and you're listening, I don't know, do some research, I guess. You can go to WTFhappened in1971.com and they got a good primer on this.
Too.
Yeah, it's a decent little website. But people will point to 1971 as sort of a central or that inflection point in the history of money. But really it wasn't. That's when Richard Nixon suspended convertibility of dollars to gold. So basically what happened after World War I was the U.S. said, hey, we've already got most of your gold, like all the different countries around the world, because they shipped off their gold reserves to the U.S. so that Germany wouldn't plunder it. They said, look, it's already here. Why don't we just have a system? And there's some debate about, do we use dollars or do we use pounds? Dollars won out. And we'll just use, just trust us. We'll hang on to your gold and we'll just convert it for dollars, right? As needed, right? So if you, France, need some money, we'll just send you some dollars because we got your gold, right? So what happened was, of course, they started lending out more than they had, fractional reserve, and then the knock-on effects is that this money U.S. dollars would make it into Europe, and then those banks would lend based on those dollars again. So now it was multiplied even beyond the original effects.
Fraction of a reserve.
Exactly. Till eventually people realize like, oh, this isn't working. And if everybody demands all their gold, like we don't have it. So Nixon that was basically an acknowledgement of that broken system.
I think all this goes to say, like, that problem still persists, that we mentioned at the top of the show, last episode as well, that human beings are still looking for a way to store value over time into the future, because, it's just human nature. It's just our tendency to work and then, how do I say this? We're trying to store the value of our labor into the future. And you have excess labor. You want to store the value for, future generations, whatever the case may be, especially for a rainy day or something that you might need. Anyways.
It's raining right now.
It's raining right now. And we don't have any
excess.
Nuts. But we still haven't solved that problem, right? And that in an imperfect world, I don't think we will solve that problem. But it doesn't change the fact that people are still going to seek solutions to it and find, right? And whether or not you actually, actively acknowledge that's the problem and then start seeking it out and like waking up in the morning going, hey, what's the best money, right?
Yeah.
Most people don't do that. But what does happen is people over time who choose harder monies, they win out over less hard or unsound monies, right? Monies that can't be debased or that are controlled by certain entities, right? So I think it comes down to the fact that like people have a choice as well to choose what is their preferred method of storing value, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I look at this is, if I want to store my value, I could choose dollars, but that's my decision. Like the government tells me how to pay my taxes in dollars. So I do need some portion of dollars, whatever. And there's this artificial demand there. But, do I want to store 100% of my wealth in money that is in the control of the government, can be printed and diluted? And so it's clearly not scarce, right? Or do I want to seek something that might have properties that, are similar to dollars, but then also have this element of scarcity that I know. So for example, gold, right? Like it's the supply of it is kind of moderated by nature itself. Like you can't just go out as a country and say, there is now more gold. Like there just isn't. Sorry, you have to go expend resources and go get it.
Show me.
Right? And prove it. Yeah. Prove it. But with fractional reserve, like they don't really show you. You by participating in that system, you essentially know that there isn't, right? And now with fiat money, there definitely isn't, and we all acknowledge that, whether or not we know it or not. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do on this podcast, is tell people about this.
Yeah, because again, we're in this system. It is being debased, and most of us don't realize it.
Yeah.
And some people kind of maybe figure it out intuitively. And this is why we like real estate, because, like you said, you can either hold your money in dollars or you can find something that's a little bit harder
to produce.
So like an asset, like real estate, for example. Yeah. And then people are like, oh, these guys, this guy invested in
all the land.
Well, no, but like this guy invested in real estate and, like, oh, he's so rich. And it's like, well, no, he's just trying to protect his
the value of
excess
time.
Value from debasement by the government. Yeah. And like, again, sort of abstract concepts, but people are really starting to realize it now that everybody's feeling pain.
Yeah.
Everybody's feeling the pinch from inflation. And like, what is going on? Why is this happening? Like, this is why.
Yeah.
Your money is debased.
Yeah.
And
all right, next time we talk about inflation, you'll leave it for another day?
Yeah. We even talk about hyperinflation, right? When inflation goes bad.
And we get hyper. All right, stay tuned, folks, for that episode. Forthcoming.
And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.